Hello, my fellow Americans. Welcome to What's the Context with your host, Natan Rifo, the podcast where we tear through the propaganda, cut through the misinformation, get straight to the unfiltered truth.
Hello and welcome. Today we're diving into something making waves in Washington, D.C. President Trump's proposed Big Beautiful Bill. The name sounds optimistic, but what's really inside this bill? And what does it mean for you? Stick around, we'll bring it down in plain English. By the end, you'll know exactly what this bill is about, how it might raise our national debt, who will gain the most, spoiler alert, most of the top 1%, and what they can mean for working Americans. Most importantly, we'll talk about what you can do, yes, you, to speak out and push back if you're not on board with this bill. Let's jump right in with a quick overview of this big, beautiful bill and why everyone's talking. Imagine a massive new law that touches everybody's money. That's what this bill is, a giant package of changes to taxes and more. President Trump has been marketing this as a big, beautiful bill. So what exactly is in it? Let's break down the major pieces of the plan. The bill will extend the tax cuts from 2017 that are set to expire very soon. Those cuts lowered income tax rates and more, and Trump wants to keep them going. He's effectively saying, remember those tax cuts we passed back then? Let's make them permanent. Sounds good, right? Wrong. A big selling point for the bill is eliminating taxes on certain types of income for workers, specifically tips you earn on the job, overtime pay, and even Social Security benefits. The idea is to put more pay in working Americans' pockets while not taxing these categories. Right now, there's a limit of around $10,000 on how much state and local taxes can deduct on your federal tax return. This is called the SALT deduction. Trump's bill would increase or remove that $10,000 cap, meaning people, mostly in higher tax states like New York and Illinois, could deduct more. That sounds technical, I understand, but it mostly helps folks with high incomes who already pay a lot in state and local taxes. The plan includes tax cuts for goods made in the US. In plain terms, it's a perk for companies to encourage products to be manufactured on American soil. The details are a bit fuzzy, but the goal is to reward made in America businesses. Why is this bill such a big deal? Because it's massive. It's not a small tweak here and there. It's a sweeping plan that would change tax laws for almost everyone. Trump has promised that tax cuts will be the centerpiece of my agenda. And this bill is basically that centerpiece. It's already passed the House, and it is now being debated in the Senate, and it's causing a lot of buzz. Supporters say it will supercharge the economy, while critics argue it's a tax break for the rich. Now let's talk about one of the most important aspects of any bill. How are we, the American people, going to pay for this? In other words, what does it do to the nation's debt and budget? Big tax cuts sound great. Who doesn't like a tax break? But there's no such thing as a free lunch. If the government takes in a lot less money because of tax cuts and keeps spending the same, something's got to give. Either the debt goes up or social benefits get cut. So how does the big beautiful bill fare on this front? In short, it's expensive, very expensive. Independent budget experts have analyzed the numbers, and they're pretty alarming. The estimates vary depending on which pieces of the bill actually happen. But here are some ballpark figures. The Committee for Responsible Federal Budget ran a rough estimate of Trump's full tax proposal. They found it could reduce federal revenue by anywhere from $5 trillion to $11 trillion over the next 10 years. Yes, that's trillion with a T. Over the long run, this could really drive up the national debt. If all these cuts aren't paid for, we could see the US debt rise from around 100% of our GDP today to as high as 150% of GDP by 2035. In plain English, that means our debt could far exceed what the entire country produces in a year, a level we've never seen in our modern history. even a more modest scenario, just say extending the 2017 tax cuts without all the other extras and benefits and fluff is pricey. The official Congressional Budget Office found that making just these tax cuts permanent would add over $4 trillion to the national debt in the next decade. Also, the Congressional Budget Office projected it would add about $37 trillion to the national debt over the next 30 years. That last number is so huge it almost doesn't even feel real. But what it means is future generations like Gen Z, which I am a part of, will potentially be drowning in even more debt because of this plan. Why does that matter to you and me? A soaring national debt can have real consequences. Higher interest rates. When the government borrows more, it can drive up interest rates. That means things like mortgage rates, car loans, student loans, and credit card interest might rise over time, making it more expensive for families to borrow money and stay afloat. Eventually, the debt has to be addressed. If we pile on trillions in new debt, there will likely be pressures to cut spending later to reduce it. That just makes sense, right? Basic economics. And that often puts programs like Medicare, Social Security, education, and infrastructure on the chopping block, programs that regular people rely on. In fact, Republicans in Congress have already planned to cut Medicaid and food stamps to pass the bill. Part of Trump's plan, no tax on Social Security benefits, might sound great to seniors, but here's the catch. Taxing Social Security benefits actually helps fund Social Security and Medicare. If you stop that taxation, you could speed up the lack of funds in the Medicare and Social Security trust funds, potentially hurting those programs in the long run. While those tax cuts can give a short-term boost, if they're funded by debt, they could drag down the economy later. The Congressional Budget Office warns that after an initial bump, the higher debt from this plan could start to slow economic growth. So much that by 2034 and beyond, the economy could actually be smaller than it would be otherwise. In other words, an early sugar rush from tax cuts might be followed by a crash, leaving us worse off in the long term. So when you hear supporters cheer that this bill will pay for itself with growth, take that with a grain of salt. Independent experts strongly disagree. They say the growth won't be enough to offset the costs, not even close. In fact, one analysis put it bluntly, financing tax cuts with debt can cause harms that often outweigh the benefits. In summary, the big beautiful bill comes with a big ugly price tag. And just like putting trillions on a national credit card, and just as with a personal credit card, the bill eventually comes due with interest. All right, now, we know what's in the plan and that it isn't cheap, but who exactly is benefiting from these tax changes? This is where things get really interesting and a bit upsetting. Proponents of the bill say it's about helping everybody. They call it tax cuts for Main Street and Wall Street. It's true that most people will get some tax reduction if this passes, but the critical question is who gets the most benefit? And on that, the numbers are crystal clear. The wealthiest Americans will pocket the lion's share of the money, while the rest of us get crumbs off their plates. In other words, a tiny sliver of ultra-rich folks would gain as much as from this tax plan as the bottom 80% of Americans combined. So basically, it's a bill for the 1%. And this is not what should be happening in our democracy. Let's break it down further in plain dollars, because this really highlights the inequity of it all. On average, someone in the top 1% earning over $1 million per year will get about a $70,000 tax cut in 2027 from this bill. Yes, you heard that right. $70,000. That's a roughly 3% increase in after-tax income for those wealthy households. The billionaires would do even better, about a $280,000 average tax cut each. That's like the price of a house in many towns, just handed it back. Here you go, as a tax break. It represents only a 3% boost to their already very high incomes. 3% might be small, but compared to the rest, the 80%. Let's say households earning around 50,000 to 100,000. They'll see about a $1,000 tax cut on average. That's a 1% increase compared to the 3% the billionaires and millionaires are getting. Hey, an extra 1 grand is nothing to seize. I understand. It can help pay a few bills or fund a small family vacation. But compare the 70,000 or even 280,000 the 1% are getting back, it's clearly unfair. For those earning under $50,000, the tax cut might be a few $100s. One estimate puts it around $237 on average for people in the under $50,000 income bracket. $237. Maybe enough to cover a one-time car repair or a week's groceries. It's helpful, sure, but it won't dramatically change anyone's life. So when we talk about the bill unfairly benefiting the top 1%, this is exactly what we mean. The richest get a massive tax break, while the vast majority, the other 99%, get crumbs. Trump and his allies argue that everyone's taxes are cut. So why complain? Well, picture this. You and 99 of your coworkers pitch in for an office pizza party. The boss's friend, who makes 100 times more than what you make, takes half the pizza for himself. The other half is split among you and the other 99 coworkers. Technically, everyone got pizza, right? But was it fair or equal? Not at all. Even so, Republicans have quietly acknowledged this imbalance. According to one report, Trump's own officials discussed maybe letting the top tax rate go up a bit for the richest as a trade-off, because they're worried about the optics of such a huge tax cut for millionaires and billionaires while possibly cutting programs like Medicaid to pay for it. One White House official said bluntly, if we renew tax cuts for the rich, paid for by throwing people off Medicaid, we're going to get slaughtered politically. That's a rare moment of honesty. They know most Americans won't be happy with a plan that gives the rich a big break and sticks the middle class with the bill. And indeed, polls show a majority of Americans, including many Republicans, actually support raising taxes on the wealthy, not cutting them. So this bill's obsession of coddling the 1% is out of step with what most American people feel is fair. All right, we've covered a lot of numbers. Let's translate this to real life. What do these lofty tax changes and debt issues mean for regular folks going about their daily lives? You might be thinking, okay, I see the rich get a lot more money out of this than I do. But aside from fairness, why do I personally care? Maybe an extra couple $100 or maybe a couple $1,000 is still good, right? It's a fair question. But let's connect the dots on how this bill's consequences could show up in your life or your community. Sure, a few hundred or $1,000 off your taxes feels nuts. But remember, that tax cut doesn't just happen. If the plan passes, the government will either go deeper into debt or cut spending to make up for it. That can mean cuts to programs that benefit you. For example, Medicaid is cut to offset revenue loss, and you and your loved ones rely on it for health coverage. A $300 tax break would not cover what you could potentially lose in lost health care support. Analysts pointed out that if tax cuts are paid for by reducing programs like Medicaid or food stamps, lower income households end up worse off overall. Their tax cut is smaller than the value of the benefits they are losing. Even middle class folks could feel the pinch if education funding or local grants get slashed. In short, you might save a bit on taxes, but then you find yourself paying more out of pocket for healthcare, education, and potentially even infrastructure. If federal support is scaled back due to the debt incurred, your community could feel it. Maybe it's fewer federal grants for opioid treatment programs, or less money for highway maintenance. I'm guessing no one watching this enjoys running over potholes. Or maybe it's less money for college students in the form of Pell Grants. These aren't directed parts of the tax bill, but they're the kinds of things that get squeezed when Uncle Sam is struggling financially after such a big tax giveaway. So the bill's effects creep into your daily lives in indirect ways. Maybe the free clinic in your area has to cut back hours, or your kid's public school does not get funding for new computers. Because state and local budgets are strained when federal aid is reduced. To put it plainly, most working class and middle class Americans won't see life changing money from this bill. It might be a small bump, a sugar rush helpful, sure, but not game changing. Meanwhile, the negative effects, like bigger debt burdens and possible future cuts to services or higher interest rates, could dwarf that little bump over time. It's like stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. And focusing on the tiny tax cut right now, we get hit with a bigger cost later. So maybe you've heard all this and thought, well, that doesn't sound great. What can I do about it? It turns out your voice matters more than you might think, especially on issues like this that affect so many people. Here are some practical steps you can take to push back against the big, beautiful bill, or any bill you have a strong feeling about. Contact your lawmakers. This is the classic move because it works time and time again. Call, email, or write to your representatives in Congress, both your House member and your senators. It can be as simple as saying, hi, I'm your constituent, and I'm concerned about this tax bill because of such and such. Trust me, they keep track of all calls and messages. You don't need to be an expert. Just speak from the heart about how you think this bill would affect you and your community. If a flood of constituents voices their opposition to a bill, it gets politicians' attention. Never forget, you are the reason why they have that position in the first place. Many members of Congress hold town hall meetings, either in person in their district or virtually by phone or Zoom. These are opportunities for you to show up and ask them questions. If your representative supports the bill, ask them why, and share your concerns about the national debt or the unfairness of it all. If they're against it, voice your support for their stance and urge them to hold firm. Public pressure at these events can be powerful. Lawmakers really pay attention when a crowd is fired up about an issue. Even in the past, angry constituents at town halls have made lawmakers rethink their positions because they realize votes and their own jobs are on the line. Join forces with others. Consider joining advocacy groups or coalitions that align with your views. These are nonpartisan groups focused on fiscal responsibility, as well as progressive groups focused on tax fairness. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. Organizations like these often organize letter writing campaigns, petitions, or demonstrations. Being part of a collective effort can amplify your impact. We are stronger united, and two minds are better than one. This bill might not pass, or it might, but these issues of tax fairness and national debt will keep coming up. Stay informed on where your elected officials stand. Remember, come election time, if this issue is important to you, hold your representatives accountable at the ballot box. Voting is one of the strongest ways to push back in the long run. Lawmakers will think twice if they know their constituents are knowledgeable and watching their choices. Before we wrap up, here's the bottom line. The big, beautiful bill is being sold as a win for everyone. But in reality, it's a lot more complicated. We would hand out gigantic tax cuts to the wealthiest 1%, and leave you, the taxpayer, footing the bill in the form of higher debts and potential cuts down the road. Love it or hate it, don't sit on the siding. Democracy is not a spectator sport, and big decisions like these need input from regular people, not just lobbyists or special issues. So if you're concerned, speak up. As we've seen, when enough people raise their voices and take a stand, they say enough is enough, politicians listen. You can make a difference, and you are too smart to allow these politicians to manipulate you. Thanks for tuning in into What's the Context with Natambu Po. If you found this episode thought-provoking, subscribe, lead any repeat, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, stay informed, stay critical, and always question the system. Thank you, and have a wonderful